You're listening to the 10 Bagger Podcast, presented by The Daily Gold. Join us as we uncover tomorrow's 10 baggers today. And now here's your host, Jordan Roy-Byrne.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the 10 Bagger Podcast. This is episode number 24, and with me today is returning guest Gwen Preston. She is the ResourceMaven. And Gwen, as we get started here, we were talking about, there's a Fed meeting, the Fed decision is coming out, but I don't know how you feel about that stuff, but for me, I feel like spending too much time on that is really a waste of time. What people should be doing is researching companies, listening to podcasts like these, listening to smart people like you. That's a better use of their time than trying to figure out, when they're going to hike rates or how much and when this is going to happen, blah, blah, blah. I know I'm on my soapbox here, but that's my first question. How do you feel about all this?
I mean, it's a great question to start with because it's literally like the Fed decision is sort of happening while we're recording this interview. So it's very pertinent. Okay, you take a step back, and clearly investment decisions have to be based in a fundamental context that makes sense, right? So you have to have reason to believe that gold is in an uptrend, not a downtrend, if you're going to invest in gold companies. So obviously, from that perspective, we need to understand what's going on with interest rates, with the economy as a whole. So it clearly matters. But I'm totally with you that the obsession has gotten very tiresome over the last little while. I mean, yeah, we are at a moment in time, right? We've had this ridiculously accommodative Federal Reserve for 12 years through a variety of things, and that is changing. And so it is significant, but I certainly, don't spend my time obsessing over whether it's going to be 25 basis points or 50 basis points. What I need to know is my outlook over the next 6, sort of 12 and longer months about whether gold, I think, will go up or down. I believe it will go up, and that's where we are. If I see, major signals changing, and that, whether it's inflation or growth or what it might be, and that changes my outlook on gold, then sure, that's important, and then I'll need to spend some time with that. But you're totally right that as long as your perspective is set, as long as you understand where you're coming from and why you're in the space as a whole, then you need to spend your time figuring out how to act on that perspective. So that means picking stocks, as opposed to obsessing over the perspective. I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah, picking stocks, what I should have said is spending time trying to find 10 baggers, and that's why I have you on, because last time I had you on, I think it was November 2019, Vizsla Resources was one of your picks, and I looked it up, and from the date of the interview, not quite a 10 bagger, but I think it was a 9 bagger. If you would have bought it if you would have bought it during the COVID crash, you would have a 10 bagger. So congratulations on that.
Thanks.
Just give me a quick follow-up on that, just for a minute of what's going on.
For sure. I was actually just writing about Vizsla when we started this call, because they put out some news last week on the Coppola vein, which is one of the newer veins that they've discovered at their Panuco project. Really, this is a story of a team, geology-wise, starting with a guy named Charles Funk, who knows Mexico very well. And he identified this opportunity. There was a lot of back work that happened with putting together a land position that had been very fractured. And then they really leaned in, and they had timing on their side for sure. They were able to get this company going when there was money available and interested. And so they could get out there with a significant exploration effort sort of right off the bat. And then the rocks also helped by yielding up a really fantastic silver vein district. And so within that, they now have a few centers of gravity, and in those centers of gravity, they just published their first resource estimate, and it blew the socks off expectations. They'd been guiding 60 million silver equivalent ounces. It ended up being almost 50% more than that, so that's great. But I think what really matters here is this thing's growing fast. The rocks keep yielding up more discoveries. So what I was writing about just when you called, was this copper vein. Now, the copper vein had only 8 holes into it when they did that resource estimate, yet it represented a quarter of the ounces in that estimate. So that just gives you a suggestion of how rich that vein is, and it's a newer discovery. And they have a long list of targets yet to test in the Panuco project. So this thing will continue to grow as quickly as it has been growing for the next while. Like the resource estimate that came out 2 weeks ago is already out of date. This thing's going to keep growing. And, high grade over mineable widths in Mexico, silver, like that's a valuable asset, especially in a rising precious metals market. So I think this thing, it doesn't have another 10 bagger ahead, but does it have a double or triple? If we get the kind of market that I think we're going to get over the next few years, yeah, I think it probably does.
Okay, that's a good segue. The kind of market we are going to get, I just one question I have for you, which let's think about 12 to 18 months. Which commodity or commodities do you think have the best chance with respect to the companies to offer 10 bagger potential? So I'm thinking 12 to 18
Yeah,
months.
12 to 18 months. That's a good question. I would say gold for sure. Gold is the most likely, the most reliable in that of the options out there. And I mean, we could dive at depth, and we won't, into the rationale there. But we're in a negative real rate environment. Rates are going to hike, but are they actually going to slow inflation? All of that stuff supports gold. We also have a very strong safe haven argument right now. I think gold is well supported in all of those areas. If you want to branch out into some that are a little bit different, I think uranium. I really am bullish on uranium in the next little while. Obviously, that move has already started. So, you're not late, but you haven't caught the first part of the wave if you invest now, but it's underway. And I think we have yet to see dramatic investor inflow into uranium. We've certainly seen some. Those who are already engaged, predisposed, knowledgeable of, have already certainly turned towards. But I think there's the bigger flood of interest is yet to come with uranium. So I think that there's certainly opportunity there. When I was scribbling down my list of companies that I might mention as 10 baggers, there is a uranium company on that list. And then copper. Now, copper is at risk of recession, right? And there's no doubt that the recession risk is higher given the Russian situation and what that might do to growth globally and stagflation concerns and all of that. So copper has its risks, but when you mention 18 months as a time frame, I'm like, well, the green energy revolution is very, very real. The lack of copper to feed that energy revolution is very real. And so if you can pick a good copper discovery story and ride it for 18 months, I think you have a good potential for 10 baggers there as well, because of that green energy revolution.
Okay, a follow up to that or no follow up. I'm thinking about because you're mostly focused on exploration. Do you think that is going to continue to be the best category to get 10 baggers? Or, I mean, is it possible? I don't know how bullish you are on gold and silver. Is it possible that a junior producer could have a chance, or even a developer? I mean, there's so many options. There's so many places you can go. I mean, how would you, or is it just company specific? I mean, if we're trying to find a 10 bagger, should we focus on one of these areas, or is it just company specific?
It's a good question. So I think my answer for that goes back to the individual, and it sort of starts with how engaged you are with your portfolio. And there's no right or wrong answer here. I'm not saying that people should be more engaged with their metals and mining portfolio. People have jobs and lives and things. But the exploration side is volatile, right? Like if a drill hit upon which a lot of weight was put, if it misses, well, that's that. So you got to be pretty engaged with your exploration portfolio. You got to pay attention. It does, if a discovery hits, a discovery is clearly the fastest way and most reliable, if it happens, there's a big if there, way of getting to a 10 bagger, right? But the market that's going to be coming down the pipes, I think can give you 10 baggers might be a bit aggressive. 5 baggers for sure on the developers, single asset operators, especially because they have that takeout potential. So the takeout, a takeout can give you a 50% upside in an instant, right? As soon as that news hits, because that's what the premium is. So I think that this market will offer that. And it sort of just comes back to the person and how engaged you want to be with your portfolio, because the explorers require you to pay attention, and not everybody, to be blunt, has the time or inclination to pay attention to their portfolio every day, and that's okay. So if you can't, then maybe you just lower your lower your goal slightly from 10 bagger to something a little lower, and then feel great about investing in the developers, the single asset operators, those who are taking an initial resource and growing it to a PEA, and it's a good asset. You could play in that world instead.
Okay, I have one follow up on you're talking about exploration. Okay, the word discovery. So I was
Mm-hmm.
talking to Kai Hoffman about this. As a technical analyst, we see Twitter in various places. Gold moves up $10 or silver's up 30 cents, and everybody loves calling it a breakout just because it
Uh,
went above some line of resistance. And Kai made the point. It's like, yeah, it's like juniors with Discovery. It's like you see Discovery in all these headlines, and I mean, that's really true.
mm,
If you find, it doesn't matter if you find a tiny bit of gold or it's some great discovery over 25 meters. I mean,
yeah.
for the layman in the audience who don't have the expertise that you do, I mean, how can we distinguish between something that's a real discovery and something that it's really not a discovery, but they're just calling it that?
Oh, that is, I so wish that there was a really easy answer to that, right? Because, I mean, it's a really good question. The word discovery absolutely gets thrown around left and right. It comes down to what's happened on that particular project before. And so you know, if it's a zone of mineralization that was known in the 60s and 70s, but then got forgotten about for years, and then a company finally has picked it up again or consolidated it and drills into it, that's not a discovery. It could be a valuable rebirth of a known zone, right? And there could be a lot of upside there, but it's not a discovery because it's different to discover something new than it is to reignite something that was known before. So, I mean, it really comes down to whether the team is testing an area that hasn't been tested before. So, when you would talk about copper, for instance, like Kodiak is a good example. They made a new discovery. Yes, there had been drilling in the area before. The drilling hadn't gone deep enough to show that there was anything economic at their project, which is in southern BC. They drilled into the first economic mineralization at that asset, and I would say that that's a discovery. I mean, Vizsla, if we go back to our previous example, sure, there'd been mining in that area before, so they didn't discover silver on the Panuco project, but what they did was discover and are continue to demonstrate that there's a heck of a lot, that there's a district of silver mineralization, there's scale and grade and width, so it can be so much more than it was. It's absolutely all shades of gray. There's no easy answer for that question. In hindsight, it's obvious because the share price jumps. The discovery happened when the share price jumped. But that's not a useful answer for anybody, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult, and discovery sounds so much better.
Oh,
And
totally,
from a
right?
marketing standpoint. And
Yeah.
I apologize for the lack of any organization to these questions. I don't know if
Eh,
I don't know if they're flowing or not. But another thing I wanted to ask you about. So with respect to 10 baggers, how do you look at pre-discovery and post-discovery? Because we're using the word discovery quite a bit.
yeah.
I mean, do you obviously pre-discovery? It goes back to what you were talking about, where you really have to be those situations you would have to be a lot more involved than post discovery perhaps. But how do you look at pre discovery and post discovery?
Yeah, another great question. So again, if you look back at the share price chart of a company that's done well, then you're like, oh, well, I wish I'd gotten in there, right? And the there is always pre discovery because the first hole into a new zone is always going to attract attention. The thing is, there's a lot of risk after that. And so to sort of distill it down, the risk, if you hit a really nice hole, a discovery hole, you've set the bar really high and it's hard to follow that. So there's actually significant risk of downside when a company releases follow-up holes to a discovery hit, if the discovery hit was really good. And so, let alone the risk that they don't hit it all in the first place, right? Which is the always there risk when you invest in pre-discovery explorers, because the vast majority of them don't make dramatic discoveries. So the amount of risk in pre-discovery is very real. And I emphasize that because, like I say, when you look back at a share price chart, you're like, oh, well, obviously I should have invested there. Well, it wasn't obvious. It was very risky. And the downside from that first spike was very real and all of that. That's why the post-discovery opportunity is a really valid one. So, the thing about it is that for all of these decisions, whether it's pre-discovery or whether it's after the first hole, you need to have some good geologic knowledge. And that's the hardest thing, right? You need to be able to understand what the hole hit, what it told us, what it didn't tell us, where they're going next, how the topography and rock type and all of the data that's been gathered about the area tells us about what else there might be beyond that one hole. If you can pull together that information and you step away from it and you're like, okay, I think that was the first hole into what's going to get better, or the first hole into something that has real scale, or, I think that this is just the start. Getting in at that point has real value. The flip side, though, is that sometimes, like you say, people announce what they call a discovery, and really they were drilling down the guts of a narrow pipe and they knew it. Maybe they were twinning an old hole and they knew it. And so that first hole is the best one and things afterwards are crap. And we've all seen share price charts that did that as well, right? A huge price spike that came off almost as steeply because the reality wasn't there. So I'm not trying to be like a super downer, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of risk of missing if you invest in pre-discovery, because there's a lot more hits than there are misses. No, I said that totally backwards. There's a lot more misses than there are hits in the exploration world. That's an absolutely true statement that any of us will stand behind any day, right? So there's a lot of misses. So getting in after the first hit is a really good option, but you just have to either know your geology or have someone who you can sort of trust to pull together, like to look at the geology and decide whether this is the start of something good. This is likely to be the start of something good, or whether this is not likely to be the start of something good. And investing after that first hit, if you're in the first camp, can be a really good option. Sorry, that was a super long answer.
No, that's very important, because this is very important stuff. Yeah, so with post discovery, I mean, one follow up to that. I know this is probably going to be really difficult to answer, but how does one distinguish between, you have a post discovery where it was where you're talking about, they knew something was there, they drilled it, they called it a discovery, then there was nothing after that. How do you distinguish between that scenario and the scenario of, yeah, this company actually made a discovery, but they haven't really found anything since then. They've been doing various work and drilling. It hasn't really moved the share price, but there's still big potential. I mean, how do you distinguish between those and find, the second scenario? How can you find those situations where there actually still is really good potential there, even though they haven't yet built on that initial discovery?
Yeah. Probably it takes some experience in listening to pitches, but I go back to the people here and what story they're telling. So if they are really drilled into whatever, twinned an old hole, or they knew there was like some narrow pipe of mineralization and they just drilled into it to get a splashy number so that they could, boost their share price, raise money, and, to be blunt, pay themselves a bunch or whatever, then the story just won't have substance, right? Like they'll keep referring back to a few pieces of maybe historic information, or a geophysical survey that they haven't that hasn't done anything else for them, the story will be thin. Whereas if there's really still potential, the story is thick. And by that, I mean, there's a bunch of layers of data there, and they're working through that data. Geology is an iterative process, right? Like, you got to try this, you got to figure out what the geophysics actually meant by drilling the hole, and then you got to reinterpret things based on what comes out of that hole, and then you got to do it to another form of geophysical response, and then you got to layer in all the other stuff that like the topography, the lidar surveys, the structures, and historical information. Like, it's really iterative, and you learn with every step. And if a team is actually in that process, then the story has substance. There's a bunch of data that's being worked through. There's other data that they're seeking to add so that they can clarify the picture, and they have clear rationale for the targets that they still want to test, right? So it really has to do with how much meat is there in the story. And when it's a crappy story, then there's not going to be a bunch of meat. Like, they'll just keep sort of going back to some, thin pieces of some thin ideas that don't hold up.
Well, I would say, not to make a joke, but I mean, you're giving us a lot of meat in this interview, for sure. I mean, this is very important stuff. I hope the listeners got that before they fast forward to this point, where I'm going to make you give us some stock picks and some potential 10 baggers, because I know that's what people really care about. But this other stuff is very important as well. But moving on from that, Gwen, do you have a company or two that you think could be a 10 bagger, or at least close to it, that you're willing to share with our audience?
Absolutely. So I'm actually going to name, and hopefully this isn't annoying, but I'm actually going to name three because they're in very different categories. And so it's partly just to cover my own ass, right? Because
It's not annoying, it's fantastic. So everybody get their
this is
pencils
my
and
odds of success.
notepads out.
Okay, so everybody knows I'm pretty bullish on uranium. I think that delivering a uranium discovery into this market would be a good way of getting a 10 bagger. And so there are, the uranium equity, the number of uranium stocks is still pretty small. It's grown for sure in the last year as the market has come back to life, but it's still pretty small. And so there's not that many groups out there doing early stage work on projects that are ready for drilling, like that are sort of at the stage ready to yield up a discovery. So I'm going to name Fortune Bay. It's FOR on the venture. They're known, if you know them as a gold company, that's because they've been a gold company for a long time. They have this Goldfields project in northern Saskatchewan. It's interesting. It's small, but it's high grade. It's like PFS level. It's got some upside. That's the gold project. That's fine. I think it gives them some options down the road, some fundamental value, all those sorts of things. The reason I like the company, though, is because there's some real uranium geologists there who can't be, no one can be a uranium geologist for their entire career because uranium is far too up and down, bear and bull market for that. So you got to move into other things when uranium's crap for a decade. So there's some really good uranium geologists in the company. And they basically realized that on the western half of their Goldfields project, there's some really good uranium data. And then just a bit west of that, there was another property that was available, also with some really interesting uranium, historic uranium results. So Fortune Bay will start exploring, like start work on those uranium opportunities. It's like underway right now. And so I think there's an opportunity there for a uranium discovery. Like I say, the back work's done by some major companies in the previous market. The stuff got forgotten. So I think that could work. High risk because it could also not work. But that's a uranium opportunity that I'll outline. On the copper front, this is a stock I already mentioned, and it sort of fits into our pre and post discovery conversation, although this is a little bit farther down the line. It's Kodiak. And I know Kodiak has already delivered a major porphyry discovery and the gate zone. Everybody knows about it who cares about copper porphyries. The reason that I'm naming it now is because this year, sure, they're going to do some drilling to keep expanding gate, but what they're really doing is testing 3 or 4 other very good looking, very similar targets on the same project. And so this remains a discovery story. And now it's supported by the fact that we already know that there's an economic porphyry right there. and they can often happen together, and all the data that they collected on that gate zone, now they know what to look for, right? It's like a fingerprint. They know what to look for right in the area. And they're going to be testing 4 other targets on their property. And the analogs here are like Philo mining, right? Philo was a long slog. They had a porphyry for a while, but their market cap was just whatever, $100 million. Kodiak's $84 million today. Until they, guess what, hit into multiple discoveries. And then one of them had some really, really good grade. And now I don't know what Philo's trading at today, but it's like 1.5 billion or more. Like the upside, if you get some significant scale of really good copper porphyry mineralization, these things become very valuable very quickly. So Kodiak, I think, has that opportunity over the next year or two, because of the fact that they're still discovery focused. They're not just going to keep growing the gate zone. They're discovery focused. And then one from a little bit left field, it's a bit of a play on the Russian situation, is in the fertilizer world. And I'm going to name Ariane phosphate, which is DAN. I think that fertilizer is going to become increasingly important over the next few years, for lots of reasons. I think that the Russian situation is going to cause some food insecurity. I think that inflation is also going to cause food insecurity. I think that demand for fertilizers was already on the up and up. I think that Russia produces a lot of fertilizer that suddenly is becoming unavailable. I think that there's a price spike ahead, even though fertilizer prices have increased a lot over the last year. I think there's a price spike ahead yet for fertilizer. And I think Ariane has a uniquely good project in the phosphate part of that world. It's in Quebec. It's completely permitted for construction. It's big. It's like a 50-year mine life. It's got good grade. It's got good metallurgy. They've done offtake agreements. Like they've done the hard grind to demonstrate that this thing's real. And it's up a double in the last 6 months because of that rising interest in fertilizer. But I think this thing could get exciting over the next year as things that are unfortunate start to transpire in our understanding of food. And even if those unfortunate things don't happen in a dramatic way, I don't think the world's going to need less food. So I think the increase in fertilizer needs is only going to continue. And I think Ariane's going to stand out as that becomes a sector at the fore of investor interest. So those are the 3 I'm going to mention: Ariane, Kodiak, and Fortune Bay.
Would you mind giving the symbols?
Sure. So Ariane is DAN, Kodiak is KDK, and Fortune Bay is FOR.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Gwen. And before I let you go, please tell our listeners about the work you do at ResourceMaven and how they can subscribe.
Oh, sure. Thanks. I publish a weekly newsletter about what I'm doing with my money in the metals and mining space. So it's under the banner ResourceMaven. It's called the Maven Letter. It comes out every Wednesday, very late on Wednesdays by the time I ever get it done. And if you would like to learn more about it or sign up for a free trial, you can do that at resourcemaven.ca.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming on, Gwen. Really enjoyed our conversation and look forward to having you back over the months ahead.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great to chat.
Thank you for listening to the 10 Bagger Podcast, presented by The Daily Gold. For premium coverage of precious metals and the best junior mining companies, visit thedailygold.com/premium.